Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Analyzing Evil. Today we're diving into the life and legend of Gangubai Kathiawadi, a name that invokes both admiration and unease in equal measure. Immortalized in the 2022 Bollywood film, she's often remembered as the mafia queen of Kamathipura, a woman who rose from betrayal and despair to become one of the most powerful and controversial figures in Mumbai's red light district. But behind the glamour of the silver screen lies a story far darker. Set during the early years of India's independence, the 1950s and 60s were a time of deep change. The country was still finding its voice, its laws, and its identity. In this period of national rebirth, many were left behind inferior women, sex workers, and invisible people living on the margins of society. Gangubai Kathiawadi, directed by Sanjay Leena Bahansali, brings to the forefront one of those stories. A young woman from Gujarat who came to Mumbai dreaming of stardom but was sold into a brothel by the man she loved. The film tells a story with heart, style, and power, painting Gangubai as the survivor who becomes the queen of her world. But behind the beautiful cinematography and strong performances lies a much more complicated truth. But while she fought for the rights of sex workers, the real Gangubai Kothewali also operated in the dark with rumors of human trafficking, extortion, and violence surrounding her name. In this analysis, we are going to look past the myth, past the glamour of the film, and into the gray space between victim and villain. We'll explore how trauma can turn into power, how ideals can become tools, and whether a person like Gangubai was fighting for justice or using justice to protect her own rule. Gangubai began her journey as a naive young woman from Kathiwadi, with dreams of stardom and a better life. Instead, she was sold into prostitution by the man she trusted most, forced into the world of exploitation she never imagined. Yet, instead of being broken by it, she climbed its brutal hierarchy, eventually becoming a brothel madam, a political operator, and a woman who commanded the respect of gangsters and politicians alike. The film portrays her as the voice of the voiceless, a champion for sex workers' dignity and human rights. But the real Gangubai was more complicated and perhaps more terrifying. A woman whose compassion was intertwined with ruthlessness, whose advocacy existed alongside allegations of trafficking, violence, and manipulation. Today we'll explore her life, her actions, her justifications for what she said, and ask the question, was Gangubai Kathiawadi truly a savior for the vulnerable, or a survivor who became the very oppressor she once feared? Gangubai's story, both in the film and in reality, begins with a dream, and that's what makes her arc so devastating. She wasn't born a queenpin of Kamathipura. She was born Ganga Hajivandas Kathiawadi in a small Gujarati town into the respected and conservative family. Her early life was relatively ordinary. Her father was a prominent local figure, and Ganga was raised with traditional values, though she was known to have a streak of boldness, even rebellion. From a young age, she dreamed of something bigger: Bollywood stardom, glamour, and escaping the suffocating limitations of her small town upbringing. According to the accounts, she idealized actresses of the era, imagining herself in films, basking in the limelight. That desire to make it was, in many ways, innocent, but it also made her vulnerable. And to the man who would change everything, Ram Nikolal, or Rahim in some accounts, depending on the telling, a slick, charming figure who promised her the world, a film career, marriage, a life in Bombay. Like so many young women in post-independence India, she saw him as her ticket out of obscurity. Trust turned into love, love turned into elopement, and elopement turned into betrayal. The film portrays this heartbreak with sympathy. Ganga, believing she's chasing her dream, follows Ramnik to Bombay. only to be sold into Kamathipura's red light district for a few hundred rupees. That much is true to real life, but where the film shows her pain and eventual rise, the reality was harsher and darker. In truth, Ganga, who would become Gangubai Kathiawadi, didn't simply endure the brothel system, she embraced and weaponized it to climb. Once broken by betrayal, she hardened, and once hardened, she began to build power. The film softened this transformation, painting her as a benevolent madam fighting for sex workers' dignity. And yes, she did advocate for their rights in real life, but in reality, her rise was bloody and brutal. The real Gangubai forged ties with the Mumbai underworld men like Karim Lala weren't just protectors, but partners in crime. She allegedly oversaw the trafficking of women, used violence to keep rivals and dissenting workers in check, and consolidated power through fear as much as through charm. This layer of her story adds moral ambiguity to her character. Did she become a protector because she truly cared for the women under her, or because her obedience fed her empire? Was she a victim of betrayal who turned pain into power, or victim who became the perpetrator? The dream that turned into a nightmare isn't just about her being sold, it's about what she became to survive that betrayal. The film leaves us with the impression of Gangubai as a tragic hero, a woman who fought the system. The reality suggests someone who joined the system, reshaped it, and in doing so, many have perpetrated some of the same cycles of exploitation she once suffered from. Her dream of escaping a small-town obscurity came true, but at the cost of who she once was. Gangubai's story forces us to ask an uncomfortable question: how far can someone go to protect themselves before they become the very thing they feared? She began as a victim, stripped of agency and dignity, sold like property into the world of violence. But instead of being consumed by the world, she learned its rules and rewrote them to her advantage. But here's a paradox. Every wall she built to shield herself was also a cage for someone else. Every act of power she took meant someone weaker stayed powerless beneath her. Was this simply the price of survival, or was it an inevitable transformation? A reminder that those who suffer don't always emerge virtuous, but sometimes wield their scars as weapons. It leaves us wondering, is it truly resilience if it turns you into the very force you once fought to escape? And here's how trauma calcification breakthrough might look. Gangubai didn't wake up one day as the mafia queen. The title was earned or built layer by layer, scar by scar. Her betrayal by the man she loved, it didn't just break her heart, it burnt away her innocence. Her fight, her first night in Kamathipura, they didn't just wound her, they taught her the economy of pain. Each humiliation hardened her, each betrayal sharpened her, until she stopped flinching, stopped begging, and started taking. What once was fear is becoming cunning. What once was vulnerability is becoming leverage. What once was a girl is becoming a force of nature. But with every line she crossed to survive, the distance between the victim she once was and the power she became grew wider. In the film, Gangubai is almost saintly. She rises to run the brothel and becomes the champion of the sex workers under her wing, demanding dignity for women society saw as disposable. She petitioned for better treatment, fights for the right to education for their children, and debates politicians, framing prostitution as the necessary evil that society should accept instead of scorn. But even the benevolence has another side. Protecting sex workers also protected her empire. Her argument that prostitution was essential for social stability wasn't just advocacy, it was strategic justification for keeping the system alive. The real Gangubai Kothewali was not just a brothel madam, she was a crime lord. As she climbed the ranks of Kamathipura, She built an empire backed by brutality, coercion, and mob connections. Alleged links to the Mumbai underworld gave her protection and muscle. She wasn't just a woman in power. She was a power broker between brothels and organized crime. Violence and intimidation were part of her rule. Rivals were crushed, disobedience punished. Rumors persist that she was complicit in trafficking other girls, perpetuating the same cycle of exploitation she had once suffered. This is the part of the film sanitizes. The cinematic Gangubai is framed as a feminist icon, a protector. The historical Gangubai was also a controller, a dealer in lives, a figure who could and did bleed her rivals. Gangubai's rise to power wasn't just built on muscle and money, it was built on idea. She didn't merely run a brothel, she crafted a philosophy around it. In the film, she is portrayed as the advocate, standing on podiums and in courtrooms, demanding respect and rights for sex workers. She argues with cutting clarity about the hypocrisy of society, how the same men who publicly scorn prostitution sneak through its doors at night, how husbands who profess virtue seek relief in secret, while wives turn their faces in silence, how lawmakers who passed crackdowns are the very ones who visit Kamathipura under the cover of darkness. Gangubai framed her work as the necessary service, a pressure valve for society's unspoken desires. In her speeches and debates, she painted herself as the protector of fallen women, claiming she gave them food, safety, and a sense of community, when the world had already cast them aside. But here's the hard question the film skirts around, and history won't let us ignore. Gangubai Kathiawadi's power didn't rest on guns or knives alone. It rested on words. She wasn't simply a madam who ran Kamathipura's brothels. She recast her empire as a mission. On the podium, in the courtroom, and quiet conversations with politicians and gangsters alike, she repeated one refrain. So, we have to ask, was Gangubai a revolutionary lifting the oppressed, or a pragmatic queenpin cloaking her power in the language of morality? In the film, this is softened into activism. Alia Bhatt's Gangubai became a patron saint for sex workers, delivering fiery speeches about dignity, demanding access to schools for their children, and challenging the hypocrisy of the very men who condemned her. She framed prostitution not as a sin, but as a necessary institution, an outlet for men, she argued, a service they crave but cannot admit they need. But here's where the real story grows darker. The historical Gangubai Kothewali, the mafia queen of Kamathipura, wasn't just defending the vulnerable, she was running rackets. She was rumored to have turned a blind eye to, and at times even overseen, the forced recruitment of girls who hadn't chosen the life she was claiming to dignify. Behind her public crusade for rights was a shadow network of bribes, territorial battles, and widespread violence. This raises a hard question. Did Gangubai believe in her philosophy, or did she use it? Maybe it was both. Maybe she convinced herself that if she could dress her empire in the language of justice, speak about human rights, about protecting women, about dignity, then the blood in her hands would wash off just a little easier. Or maybe she had to believe it, because if she didn't, then every compromise she made, every cruel choice would crush her. Gangubai's philosophy is deceptively simple. Prostitution will never go away. If it exists, it must exist with dignity. On the surface, this feels pragmatic, even noble, but ask yourself, was this truly a moral stance or a convenient shield for a growing empire? Her speeches about dignity rarely included pathways for women to leave sex work. They were about improving conditions within it, not dismantling it. For the girls trapped in Kamathipura, she was both guardian and gatekeeper. The 2022 film paints Gangubai as the white rose of Kamathipura, a woman of honor in a dishonorable world. But history is less forgiving. The real Gangubai's hands were not clean. Blood was spilled to maintain her position. The film omits the darker criminal web of extortion, beatings, and the fear she wielded. In reality, her rule was not simply born of compassion. It was built on power, deals, and domination. The gap between those two versions of Gangubai, the silver screen savior and the shadowy crime queen, reveals how history and myth collide. Gangubai Kathiawadi is not easy to classify. She was a victim who became a master, a protector who may have also been an oppressor. Her life forces us to confront questions with no easy answers. Was Gangubai an advocate for sex workers or a crime boss who found moral cover in the language of empowerment? Can someone fight for dignity while profiting from exploitation? Does surviving unimaginable betrayal give someone the license to build an empire on the same suffering? And most uncomfortably, should history remember her as a feminist icon, a mafia queen, or something in between? Gangubai Kathiawadi's story is the story of pain turned into power, of a victim who learned to wield the same systems that once crushed her. But the truth, stripped of a cinematic glow, is messy. She was neither pure villain nor pure hero, but a complex, dangerous, and deeply human force in the world that left her little choice but to become one. The question isn't just who's Gangubai, it's what when survival turns into a rule, and rule into something darker.